The glass tower of Horizon Technologies stood tall against the evening sky, its windows still bright with activity despite the late hour. On the 32nd floor, Thomas Reed leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his tired eyes. As the CEO of one of the city's fastest-growing tech companies, long nights were nothing new to him. But tonight something else kept him from heading home. Thomas walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office and looked down at the sprawling city below. From this height, everyone looked small, their lives a mystery to him. He prided himself on knowing his employees, not just their names, but their stories. Yet lately, the company had grown so quickly that keeping up with everyone had become impossible. A knock on his open door pulled Thomas from his thoughts. "Still here, boss?" Miguel, his head of security, stood in the doorway. "It's almost 9, Thomas nodded. "Just wrapping up. How many people are still in the building?" Miguel checked his tablet. "About 20. Mostly IT folks dealing with that server issue. Oh, and Karen from customer service is still at her desk. Third double shift this week." Thomas frowned. "Karen Wilson? From the second floor?" "That's her. Been working like crazy lately. Always the first in, last out." After Miguel left, Thomas couldn't shake his curiosity about Karen. He recalled meeting her during company orientation 3 months ago, a quiet woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She'd mentioned having previous customer service experience but was new to the tech industry. Nothing in their brief interaction explained why someone would voluntarily work 16-hour days. Thomas packed up his laptop, deciding to stop by the second floor on his way out. The customer service department was dimly lit. Most desks empty except for one in the far corner where a woman sat, phone pressed to her ear, nodding patiently as she typed. "Yes, sir." "I understand your frustration," Karen was saying. "Let me see what I can do to resolve this for you." Thomas waited, watching as she skillfully calmed an obviously upset customer, her voice maintaining its warmth, even as the call stretched past 10 minutes. When she finally hung up, she sighed deeply before noticing him standing there. "Mr. Reed." She jumped to her feet, smoothing her simple blouse. "I didn't see you there." "Please sit down," Thomas said, gesturing to her chair. "And call me Thomas. It's Karen, right?" She nodded, looking nervous. "Miguel mentioned you've been working double shifts, 3 this week alone." Karen tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, sir, Thomas. There's been a high call volume and I don't mind the extra hours." Thomas noticed the slight shadows under her eyes contradicting her words. "That's dedication I appreciate, but everyone needs rest." "I'm fine, really." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The overtime helps." Before Thomas could respond, Karen's stomach growled loudly. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Sorry," she murmured. "I missed dinner." "The cafeteria closed hours ago," Thomas said, checking his watch. "But I think they keep some sandwiches in the break room fridge." Karen shook her head. "I brought food from home. Just haven't had time to eat it." She glanced at her phone as it buzzed with a text message, her expression shifting to worry before she quickly put it away. "Well, don't let me keep you from your dinner," Thomas said. "And Karen? Don't push yourself too hard. The company needs you healthy." She thanked him, and Thomas headed toward the elevator, his curiosity only deepening. Something about Karen's situation didn't add up. The worry in her eyes, the eagerness for overtime, the missed meals. As a business leader, he'd learned to trust his instincts about people, and his instincts were telling him there was more to Karen's story. The next morning, Thomas arrived earlier than usual. He greeted the security team, made small talk with the maintenance staff, and then took a detour through customer service. Sure enough, Karen was already at her desk, headset on, focused intensely on her computer screen. Throughout the day, Thomas found reasons to pass through the second floor. Each time, Karen was working diligently, taking calls, helping colleagues, never taking breaks longer than necessary. During lunch, he spotted her in the cafeteria line, but instead of eating there, she asked for a takeout container. "Could I possibly have a bit extra?" she asked the cafeteria worker quietly. "I'll pay for it, of course." The cafeteria worker smiled warmly. "Don't worry about it, honey. I always make too much anyway." She heaped an extra serving of pasta into Karen's container. Thomas pretended to be checking his phone, but he watched as Karen carefully packed not just 1 but 2 containers with food. She added extra bread rolls, wrapped them in napkins, and tucked them into her bag before heading back to her desk. Curious about this pattern, Thomas asked his assistant to pull Karen's employment file. He learned she'd been hired 3 months ago after being recommended by another employee. Her resume showed steady employment, but frequent moves between cities. Nothing remarkable stood out except for her request upon hiring to work as many hours as legally possible, including weekends and holidays. That evening, Thomas stayed late again. Around 8, he walked by the cafeteria just as the staff was cleaning up. "Hi, Mr. Reed," called Debbie, who had managed the company cafeteria for years. "Need something before we close up?" "Just grabbing a coffee," he replied, pouring himself a cup. "Busy day today?" "Same as usual," Debbie said, wiping down counters. "Oh, except Karen was asking if we had any leftovers again." Thomas tried to sound casual. "Does she do that often?" Debbie nodded. "Most days. At first I thought maybe she was struggling to make ends meet, you know. But then I noticed she always takes more than one person could eat." She lowered her voice. "I think she might be feeding someone else too. Family, maybe? I always give her whatever we have left. Better than throwing it away." "That's kind of you," Thomas said, his mind working. "Do you know if she's mentioned family?" "Not really. She's pretty private. Sweet as can be, always says please and thank you, but doesn't share much about herself." Thomas thanked Debbie and headed back to his office, even more intrigued. An hour later, he saw Karen walking toward the elevator, her bag bulging with what he assumed were the food containers. On impulse, he grabbed his jacket and followed at a distance. He wasn't sure what drove him, concern for an employee or simple curiosity, but something told him Karen's story mattered. In the parking garage, he watched her board the employee shuttle to the train station instead of heading to a car. Thomas decided to follow in his own vehicle, keeping a respectful distance. At the train station, Karen boarded the eastbound train, heading away from the city center toward the older suburban neighborhoods. Thomas parked his car and barely made it onto the same train, choosing a seat far enough away that she wouldn't notice him. As the train rattled along, Thomas questioned what he was doing. Following an employee after hours crossed professional boundaries, possibly even ethical ones. But his concern outweighed his doubts. If Karen was in trouble, if there was something the company could do to help, he wanted to know. After 30 minutes, Karen got off at a stop Thomas barely recognized. The neighborhood had seen better days. Small houses with peeling paint, apartment buildings with security bars on lower windows, and fewer working streetlights than there should have been. Karen walked quickly, her posture alert as darkness fell. Thomas followed at a distance, his expensive coat and shoes making him feel conspicuous in this part of town. After several blocks, she turned into a small apartment complex, 3 buildings arranged around a central courtyard with patches of struggling grass. Through the lit windows of the ground floor, Thomas could see a common room where several elderly people sat in mismatched chairs, apparently waiting. When Karen entered, their faces lit up. She greeted each person with a hug or a touch on the shoulder before unpacking her bag, setting out the food containers from the cafeteria. Thomas stood in the shadows, watching as Karen served dinner to what looked like 8 or 9 seniors. They chatted and laughed as they ate, many of them moving slowly or using canes. One woman in a wheelchair squeezed Karen's hand in thanks. The scene was both heartwarming and puzzling. Was this why Karen worked double shifts? To feed a group of elderly neighbors? As he turned to leave, Thomas nearly bumped into a young man approaching the building. "Sorry," Thomas said, stepping back. The young man eyed him suspiciously. "You looking for someone?" "No, Thomas hesitated. "I was just walking by." "Nobody just walks by here," the man said, glancing toward the building. "You know Karen?" Caught off guard by the direct question, Thomas nodded. "I work with her." The young man's expression softened slightly. "Oh, you're from her job?" "Yes, Thomas almost gave his real title, but thought better of it. "I'm from IT. Had to drop off some paperwork she forgot." "Well, you just missed her. She's doing dinner for the seniors." Pride crept into the young man's voice. "My aunt started that program years ago, and when she passed, Karen kept it going. Those folks would go hungry without her, you know. Most of them can't get out easy, and social services around here are a joke." Thomas nodded, processing this new information. "How long has she been doing this?" "About 6 months now. Works herself to the bone to keep it going, too." The young man shook his head. "Keeps saying she'll find funding someday, but for now it's all out of her own pocket. Anyway, I gotta go help serve. Nice meeting you." As the young man headed inside, Thomas stood there for a long moment, watching through the window as Karen moved among the elderly residents, refilling plates and listening intently to their stories. He'd followed her expecting to find a problem to solve, perhaps financial troubles or family issues explaining her need for extra shifts. Instead, he'd discovered something entirely different, an employee silently carrying the weight of an entire community on her shoulders, asking for nothing but the chance to work more hours. Thomas walked back to the train station, his mind racing with questions and ideas. The company had resources, considerable resources that could help. But would Karen accept such help? She hadn't asked for anything beyond the opportunity to work. Her pride and privacy were clearly important to her. By the time he reached his car, Thomas had made a decision. Tomorrow he would find a way to help that respected Karen's dignity, while addressing the obvious need. But he would have to be careful about how he approached her, given what he now knew. As he drove home through the glittering city, the contrast between his world and Karen's struck him deeply. He'd built his career solving complex business problems, but the simplest human needs, food, community, care for the vulnerable, these were the challenges that truly mattered. For the first time in years, Thomas felt something shift in his perspective. There was important work to be done, and it wouldn't be found in quarterly reports or board meetings. It would begin tomorrow with a conversation, and perhaps lead to something that would change not just Karen's life, but his own as well. Thomas spent a restless night, his mind returning again and again to what he had witnessed. The image of Karen serving food to the elderly residents stayed with him. Her gentle manner, the obvious care in her actions, the grateful faces of those she helped. By morning, he had formulated a plan, but he needed more information first. He arrived at the office earlier than usual and headed straight to the HR department. Pamela, the HR director, looked up in surprise when he knocked on her open door. "Thomas, you're here bright and early. Everything okay?" "Morning, Pam. I need some information about one of our employees, Karen Wilson in customer service." Pamela's expression shifted to concern. "Is there a problem with her work?" "Just the opposite," Thomas assured her. "She's been putting in a lot of overtime, and I wanted to check on her situation." "How much do we know about her background?" Pamela pulled up Karen's file on her computer. "Let's see. She came to us with good references from her previous job at a call center in Riverside. Before that, she worked at a community center for about 5 years. Her application mentioned volunteer experience with senior citizens." "That fits," Thomas murmured. "Pardon?" "Nothing. What about family? Does she have dependents?" Pamela scrolled through the file. "No dependents listed. Her emergency contact is someone named Luis Rodriguez, listed as friend. That's unusual. Most people put family members." Thomas nodded, thinking of the young man he'd met outside Karen's apartment building. "Anything else that stands out?" "Well, her salary request was below the range we typically offer for her position, even though her qualifications were solid. I remember thinking it was strange at the time, but we adjusted it up to our minimum anyway." "And she's been taking all the overtime she can get," Thomas added. "Yes, her supervisor mentioned that. She's never turned down extra hours, even holidays." Pamela looked up at Thomas with curiosity. "What's this about?" "If her work is good." "Her work is excellent," Thomas interrupted. "I'm just trying to understand something. Thanks for the help, Pam." Thomas spent the morning in back-to-back meetings, but his thoughts kept drifting to Karen and her hidden life of service. Around lunchtime, he made his way to the customer service floor. Karen was at her desk, headset on, speaking patiently to a customer while typing notes. Thomas waited until she finished the call, then approached. "Got a minute?" he asked. Karen looked startled but quickly stood. "Of course, Mr. Reed, I mean Thomas. Let's talk in the break room," he suggested, not wanting to draw attention from her colleagues. The break room was empty, everyone else having already taken their lunch breaks. Karen sat across from Thomas at a small table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Am I in trouble?" she asked, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. Thomas shook his head. "Not at all. I wanted to talk to you about your overtime hours." Karen's shoulders tensed. "Is there a problem?" "I know I've been working a lot, but I've stayed within the legal limits and my supervisor approved." "Karen," Thomas interrupted gently. "You're not in trouble. I'm concerned, that's all. You've been working 16-hour days for weeks now. That's not sustainable. She looked down at her hands. I need the hours. I understand that, Thomas said carefully. But I wonder if there might be another way to address whatever situation you're facing. Karen's eyes snapped up to meet his. What do you mean? Thomas took a deep breath, knowing he was about to cross a line. I saw you last night, her face paled. What? I followed you home, he admitted. I know that was inappropriate and I apologize. But I was concerned. You've been working double shifts, taking extra food from the cafeteria. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Karen stared at him, speechless. I saw what you're doing for those seniors in your building, Thomas continued. And I spoke briefly with a young man outside. Luis, I think. You talked to Luis? Karen's voice was barely above a whisper. Just briefly. He mentioned his aunt started the program. Karen's posture changed, her shoulders slumping slightly as the secret was out. His Aunt Maria was my neighbor when I first moved there. She ran the dinner program for years, cooking meals in her tiny kitchen, serving whoever needed food. When she got sick last year, I started helping out. And when she passed away, Karen's voice caught. Those people have nobody else. Most of them can't leave their apartments easily. Some don't have family checking on them. They'd go hungry without those meals. So you took over, Thomas said. And you're funding it all yourself, Karen nodded. That's why I need the overtime. My regular salary covers my bills, but the extra hours pay for the food. It's not much, but it's enough to make sure nobody goes to bed hungry. How many people are you feeding? Usually between 8 and 12, it varies. Some days more if word gets out that I have extra food. She looked directly at Thomas, her voice growing firmer. I know following me was crossing a line, but please understand, I don't want charity. I'm not asking the company for anything. I just want to work the hours I'm scheduled and help my neighbors. That's all. Thomas considered his next words carefully. What if there was a way to help those seniors without you working yourself into exhaustion? Karen frowned. What do you mean? Our company has a community outreach budget that's barely been touched this year. We're always looking for meaningful ways to invest in the communities where our employees live. I don't understand, Karen said, though her expression suggested she was beginning to. What if Horizon Technologies sponsored your meal program, officially through our community service initiative? Thomas leaned forward. We could provide the food, volunteers if you want them, even expand to help more people in your neighborhood. Karen's eyes widened. You do that? Why? Because it matters, Thomas said simply. What you're doing matters. And frankly, it aligns perfectly with the kind of community engagement we've been trying to develop. But there's a condition. What's that? Karen asked cautiously. You have to stop working double shifts, at least not every day. I need you healthy and rested. A small smile tugged at Karen's lips. That's your condition? That I work less? Exactly, Thomas said, returning her smile. So what do you think? Karen was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant as she considered the offer. The seniors. They've become like family to me. I'd want to stay involved, of course. You'd oversee the program. We'd just provide the resources. And what happens when the company decides it's not worth the investment anymore? She asked, her practical nature showing through. It was a fair question. Thomas knew how quickly corporate priorities could shift. We'll set up a dedicated fund, he promised, with enough money to sustain the program for at least 3 years, regardless of any changes in company policy. And I'll personally ensure it continues beyond that. Karen studied his face, searching for sincerity. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly. I'd need to think about it. Talk to the seniors, too. They're proud people. They might not want corporate charity. It's not charity, Thomas corrected her. It's community investment. But take your time. Talk to them. I'd like to meet them properly if that's okay. You want to meet them? Karen asked, surprised. Yes. What they're experiencing, what you're doing to help, I want to understand it better. Not just write a check and walk away. Karen's expression softened. They'd like that. They don't get many visitors. Their conversation was interrupted by Karen's phone alarm. I should get back to my desk, she said, standing. Of course, Thomas agreed. But Karen? No double shift today. Doctor's orders, she smiled, a real smile this time. I'll try. As Karen headed back to her desk, Thomas remained in the break room thinking. What had started as simple curiosity about an employee's unusual behavior had revealed something unexpected. Not just about Karen, but about the gaps in how his company connected with the community. For years, Horizon Technologies had donated to large charities, sponsored big events, put their logo on fundraising materials. But had they ever truly engaged with the people in their city? Had they addressed the real needs that existed just blocks from their gleaming office tower? Thomas pulled out his phone and texted his assistant. "Cancel my evening meetings and find out who handles our community outreach budget." That evening, instead of working late in his office, Thomas drove to Karen's neighborhood. This time he parked his car and walked openly to her apartment building. He'd texted her earlier to let her know he was coming, and she met him at the entrance. "Thanks for letting me visit," he said. Karen nodded, looking slightly nervous. "They're excited to meet you. I didn't tell them you're the CEO, though. I just said you're my boss who wants to help." "That works for me," Thomas said. She led him into the community room where the seniors were gathered. Some sat in chairs arranged in a small circle, while others stood by a table where food was being set out. The room itself was worn but clean, with faded curtains and mismatched furniture that had seen better days. "Everyone," Karen called out. "This is Thomas from my work. Thomas, meet the dinner club." A gray-haired woman with bright eyes was the first to approach. "So you're the boss man," she said, looking him up and down. "Karen says you might help with our meals." "I'd like to," Thomas replied, instantly charmed by her directness. "Why?" the woman asked. "What do you get out of it?" "Mother Jones," Karen said in a warning tone. "Don't interrogate him," Thomas smiled. "It's a fair question. The truth is, I'm still figuring that out. But I know that what happens here matters, and I'd like to be part of it." Mother Jones studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Well, you're dressed too fancy, but you've got honest eyes. Come get some food. We're having spaghetti tonight." As Thomas was introduced to each person in the room, he began to understand why Karen had been so dedicated to keeping this program going. These weren't just hungry people. They were a community, supporting each other, sharing stories, creating a family of choice in their later years. By the end of the evening, as he helped Karen and Luis wash dishes in the tiny kitchen, Thomas knew that whatever shape this program took going forward, it would become a central part of both Horizon's community work and his own life. "You didn't have to help clean up," Karen said as she handed him a plate to dry. "I wanted to," Thomas replied, and he realized it was true. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt connected to something real, something that mattered in a way that profit margins and quarterly reports never could. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the office with a renewed sense of purpose. He'd spent half the night thinking about Karen's dinner program and the people he'd met. Mother Jones with her sharp questions and sharper wit, Luis fiercely protective of both Karen and the seniors, the quiet man in the corner who had fought in Vietnam and now couldn't afford his medication, the retired teacher who made everyone laugh with stories about her former students. Thomas called a meeting with his executive team, including Pamela from HR and Anthony, the company's CFO. "I want to talk about our community outreach," Thomas began after everyone had settled around the conference table. "Specifically, I want to create a new program focused on food security for seniors." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "That's specific. Any particular reason?" "I recently learned about a grassroots effort one of our employees is running," Thomas explained. "Karen Wilson from customer service has been working double shifts to fund a dinner program for elderly residents in her apartment building." He described what he'd seen, Karen's dedication, the grateful seniors, the obvious need that extended beyond just this one building. "The thing is," Thomas continued, "she's been doing this alone on a customer service salary, working herself to exhaustion in the process. I think we can do better. I think we should do better." "So you want to fund her dinner program?" Pamela asked. "I want to do more than that," Thomas replied. "I want to create a corporate initiative that supports similar programs throughout the city. Karen's could be our pilot." The team exchanged glances. It wasn't the first time Thomas had proposed a new idea with enthusiasm, but there was something different in his tone today, a conviction that went beyond professional interest. "What exactly are you proposing?" Anthony asked. "A three-part approach," Thomas said, warming to his subject. "First, direct support for Karen's existing program, funding, food supplies, whatever they need. Second, identifying similar needs in other neighborhoods where our employees live. And third, creating a fellowship program where our staff can volunteer time to these efforts with paid hours." "That's ambitious," Anthony said cautiously. "What kind of budget are we talking about?" "I've done some preliminary math," Thomas said, sliding a folder across the table. We can start with a modest investment and scale up based on results. The point is to create something sustainable, not just a one-time donation. The discussion continued for over an hour, with questions about logistics, tax implications, and company image. Thomas answered each concern patiently, but with a firmness that his team recognized. His mind was made up. Finally, Pamela, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, spoke up. I think it's a wonderful idea, Thomas, but have you considered who's going to run this? Our community relations team is already stretched thin with existing projects. Thomas had been waiting for this question. I want Karen to lead it. The room fell silent. Karen Wilson? Anthony asked. The customer service rep you just mentioned? No offense, but does she have any management experience? She's been successfully running this program on her own for months, Thomas pointed out. And before that, she worked at a community center for 5 years. She knows the neighborhood, she knows the needs, and most importantly, she cares. We can provide training and support for the administrative side. It's unorthodox, Pamela said carefully, but it could work. We'd need to create a new position. Director of Community Engagement, Thomas suggested, with appropriate compensation, of course. By the end of the meeting, they had the outline of a plan. There were still details to work out, but Thomas had secured the team's tentative support. Now came the harder part, convincing Karen. He found her at her desk during her lunch break, eating a simple sandwich while reviewing customer notes. Got a minute? He asked. Karen looked up, her expression curious. Of course. They walked to the same break room where they'd talked before. This time, Karen seemed more relaxed, though still clearly wondering why the CEO was seeking her out again. I've been thinking about your dinner program, Thomas began. Karen nodded. I talked to everyone last night after you left. They were cautiously open to the idea of company support, as long as it doesn't change the heart of what we do. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about, Thomas said. I don't want to just throw money at this and walk away. I want to build something meaningful, something that lasts, and I want you to lead it. Karen blinked. Lead what exactly? Thomas explained the vision he'd shared with his executive team, the 3-part approach, the focus on senior food security, the potential to expand beyond her building to other neighborhoods. We'd create a new position, he continued. Director of Community Engagement. You'd oversee not just your dinner program, but help us identify and support similar efforts across the city. Karen stared at him, speechless. It would mean leaving customer service, Thomas added. But the salary would be significantly higher, and you'd have a budget and resources to work with instead of funding everything yourself. You're offering me a job, Karen said slowly. A management position. Yes. Because I've been feeding my neighbors, Thomas leaned forward. Because you saw a need and you filled it, without being asked, without recognition at personal cost to yourself. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need. Karen looked down at her hands. I don't know, Thomas. I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like this. You've been doing the hardest part already, Thomas pointed out. Running the program with no resources. The rest, the administrative skills, the budget management, we can teach you that. Karen was quiet for a long moment. What if I say no? Will you still help with the dinner program? Yes, Thomas said without hesitation. That offer stands regardless. But I hope you'll consider this. Sleep on it at least, Karen nodded. I will. Thank you. As Thomas stood to leave, Karen asked, Why are you doing this? Really? You barely know me. Thomas paused, considering his answer. When I was growing up, my grandmother lived in a neighborhood a lot like yours. After my grandfather died, she struggled. Pride kept her from asking for help, even from family. One day, a neighbor found her collapsed in her apartment. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. Karen's expression softened. I'm sorry. She recovered, Thomas continued. But it made me realize how invisible some people become, especially as they age. What you're doing, it matters, not just to those seniors, but to all of us. It reminds us to see each other. With that, he left Karen to think about his offer. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and preparations. Thomas had put his executive assistant in charge of gathering information about senior food insecurity in the city. The numbers were sobering. Thousands of elderly residents struggling to access regular meals, with existing services reaching only a fraction of those in need. Meanwhile, The legal team drafted paperwork for the new initiative, and HR prepared a job description for the Director of Community Engagement position. Should Karen accept it? On Friday afternoon, Thomas's phone rang. It was Karen. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said without preamble. "And?" Thomas prompted when she didn't continue. "I have some conditions." Thomas smiled to himself. "I'm listening. First, I want to start small. Focus on getting my building's program properly funded before we expand." "Reasonable," Thomas agreed. "Second, I want to stay hands-on. No matter how big this gets, I don't want to just sit in an office. I need to be serving meals, talking to people, hearing their stories." "Also reasonable." "Third," Karen continued, her voice growing firmer, "I want Luis involved. He's been helping me since his aunt died, and he knows the neighborhood even better than I do. He's smart. Just never had opportunities for college." Thomas thought about the young man he'd briefly met. "We could create an assistant position. Or better yet, a community liaison role." "You'd do that?" Karen sounded surprised. "If he's as capable as you say, absolutely." There was a pause on the line. "One last thing," Karen said. "Mother Jones wants to meet with you again. She says, and I quote, 'I need to make sure that fancy man isn't just doing this to make himself feel good.'" Thomas laughed. "Tell her I'll be there Monday evening." "So you agree to my conditions?" "I do," Thomas confirmed. "Does that mean you accept the position?" Another pause. "Yes," Karen said finally. "I'll do it. I still think you're taking a chance on someone with no management experience, but I'm taking a chance on someone with heart, persistence, and first-hand knowledge." Thomas interrupted gently. "The rest we can figure out together." After they hung up, Thomas sat back in his chair, feeling a satisfaction that had nothing to do with stock prices or profit margins. The company would benefit from this initiative. Good publicity, employee engagement, tax benefits, but that wasn't why he was doing it. He thought about Mother Jones's question from his first visit. "What do you get out of it?" At the time, he hadn't had a clear answer. Now he did. He was getting the chance to create something meaningful. Something that would outlast quarterly reports and executive summits. Something real. Monday evening found Thomas back at Karen's apartment building, this time carrying several large pizza boxes. He'd texted Karen earlier, asking what the seniors might enjoy for dinner, and pizza had been the overwhelming favorite. The community room was busier than his previous visit. Word had spread about the potential new program, and several residents from other floors had joined the regular group. Thomas recognized most of the faces from before, but there were at least 5 new people, including an elderly couple who sat holding hands in the corner. Mother Jones waved him over to her chair. "You brought pizza," she observed. "Smart man." Thomas smiled as he set the boxes on the table. "I hear it was your idea." "Been craving a good slice for months," she admitted. "The delivery places won't come to this neighborhood after dark anymore." As Luis and Karen helped distribute the food, Thomas pulled up a chair next to Mother Jones. "Karen says you wanted to talk to me," he said. The older woman studied him, her eyes sharp despite her age. "I've seen programs like this come and go. Churches, charities, politicians looking for votes, they all show up. Make promises, take pictures, and disappear when the next shiny thing catches their attention. That's not what this is," Thomas assured her. "Maybe not," she allowed. "But I need to know why a big-shot CEO suddenly cares about a bunch of old folks in a run-down building." "What's your story, Thomas Reed?" Thomas was surprised she knew his full name. "You've been researching me," Mother Jones smiled. "Luis has a computer. I know how to use Google. Your company makes those fancy security systems, right? The ones no one around here can afford." Thomas nodded, acknowledging the point. "Among other things, yes, so I'll ask again. Why are you here?" Thomas looked around the room, at Karen laughing with a resident, at Luis teaching an elderly man how to use a smartphone, at the couple in the corner sharing a slice of pizza, and found himself telling Mother Jones the truth. About his grandmother, yes, but also about the emptiness he'd been feeling lately, the sense that despite his success, something essential was missing. "I followed Karen because I was curious," he admitted. "I stayed because what I found here reminded me of what matters." Mother Jones listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "Well," she said finally, "at least you're honest. That's something." From across the room, Karen caught Thomas's eye and smiled. Whatever Mother Jones saw in that exchange must have satisfied her, because she patted Thomas's hand. "You'll do," she said simply before raising her voice. "Now who's going to bring me another slice of that pepperoni?" 3 months passed quickly. The community dinner program, now officially named Neighborhood Table, had transformed from Karen's solo effort into a structured initiative with proper funding, regular volunteers, and a growing reach. What had started in one apartment building now served 3 nearby senior communities as well, providing not just food, but companionship and support. The conference room on the 30th floor of Horizon Technologies had been converted into a temporary headquarters for the program. One wall was covered with maps of the city, colored pins marking current and potential locations. Another displayed photos of the seniors, their faces bright with smiles as they gathered around tables laden with food. Karen sat at the head of the table, reviewing budget reports with a focus that impressed even Thomas. She had taken to her new role with unexpected confidence, quickly mastering the administrative skills she'd worried about. Her practical experience combined with genuine passion made her a natural leader. "We've managed to cut food costs by 20% by partnering with that restaurant supply company," she was explaining to Thomas and Anthony. "And we've got 15 employee volunteers now, all using their community service hours." "The board is impressed," Anthony admitted, looking over the numbers. "When Thomas first proposed this, I'll be honest, I thought it was just going to be a nice little charity project. But you've turned it into something substantial." Karen smiled. Though Thomas noticed she still seemed slightly uncomfortable receiving praise from executives who had once been several levels above her in the company hierarchy. "It's all about relationships," she said. "The seniors trust us now. They're telling their friends. And that restaurant supplier? His mother lives in the second building we expanded to. He's giving us those discounts because he's seen the difference the program is making." Thomas nodded, not surprised. This was exactly why he'd wanted Karen to lead the initiative. She understood that community work was built on trust and connection, not just efficient delivery of services. "How's Luis doing with the outreach?" he asked. Karen's face brightened. "Amazing. He's mapped out every senior living facility and low-income apartment building with elderly residents in a 5-mile radius. And he's recruiting volunteers from the neighborhoods themselves, people who might not have money to donate but have time and energy." The meeting continued, discussing challenges and next steps. When Anthony left to prepare for another appointment, Thomas stayed behind. "You look tired," he said to Karen once they were alone. "Everything okay?" Karen sighed, letting her professional demeanor slip slightly. "Just busy. Mother Jones had a fall last week, nothing broken, thankfully, but it scared everyone. I've been checking on her more often." "You're still personally delivering meals?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. "Of course. That was one of my conditions, remember? No matter how big this gets, I stay hands-on." She smiled. "Besides, they'd never forgive me if I sent someone else. Mother Jones says corporate types don't season the food properly." Thomas laughed. "She has strong opinions." "She does," Karen agreed, her expression growing more serious. "Thomas, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. It's about the Davis Tower apartments." Thomas recognized the name. A notorious public housing complex that had been in the news for maintenance issues and neglect. "What about it?" he asked. "Luis has a cousin who works there as a maintenance man. He says there are at least 60 seniors in that building, many living alone. No food delivery services will go there because of the neighborhood's reputation. The nearest grocery store is over a mile away." "You want to expand there next?" Thomas guessed. Karen nodded. "It would be challenging. The building has security issues and there's no good community space for shared meals. We'd need to think differently about how to deliver the program." "But you think it's important?" "I think it's essential," Karen said firmly. "Those seniors are the most isolated, the most vulnerable. If our program is really about reaching those in need, we can't ignore them just because it's difficult." Thomas considered this. The Davis Tower expansion would be complicated, potentially risky, and would require additional resources. But he trusted Karen's judgment now, and her commitment to serving those who needed it most had only deepened his respect for her. "Put together a proposal," he said. "Include what additional support you'll need, any security concerns, everything. If you believe this is the right next step, I'll back you." The gratitude in Karen's eyes was worth any potential complications. "Thank you. I'll have it on your desk by Friday." Later that afternoon, Thomas received a text from Luis. Mother Jones asking when you're coming for dinner again. Says you promised to bring that apple pie. Thomas smiled. He had indeed promised to bring dessert on his next visit, after discovering Mother Jones had a sweet tooth. Despite his busy schedule, he'd made it a point to join the dinner program at least twice a month, sometimes helping serve, other times just sitting and listening to the seniors' stories. Tell her Thursday, he texted back. With pie. On Thursday evening, Thomas parked outside Karen's apartment building, carefully balancing 2 freshly baked pies from the city's best bakery as he made his way inside. The community room was alive with chatter and laughter, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost hesitant gathering he'd first encountered months ago. The big boss is here, called out Walter, a retired postal worker who had become one of Thomas's favorite dinner companions, and he brought pie. Mother Jones, seated in her usual chair but now with a cane propped beside her, motioned Thomas over. About time. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten us now that your fancy program is getting all that attention. Thomas had learned that Mother Jones's gruffness hid a deeply caring heart. Never, he replied, taking the seat beside her. How's the leg? Hurts like hell, she said matter-of-factly. But I'm not dead yet, so I count that as a win at my age. Across the room, Karen was helping a new volunteer set up the food service line. She caught Thomas's eye and waved, looking more relaxed here among the seniors than she ever did in corporate meetings. Luis appeared at Thomas's side, lowering his voice. Hey, got a minute? There's someone I want you to meet. Thomas followed Luis to the far corner of the room, where an elderly man sat alone, his posture rigid, eyes wary. This is Mr. Rivera, Luis said. He's from Davis Tower, first time joining us. Thomas extended his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Rivera. I'm Thomas. The man hesitated before shaking his hand. You're the one funding all this? The company is, Thomas corrected gently. I just helped get it started. Karen and Luis do the real work. Mr. Rivera nodded slowly. My neighbor told me about the food. Didn't believe there was such a thing as a free meal these days. Had to see for myself. Well, I hope you'll join us regularly, Thomas said, and bring your neighbor next time. Maybe, Mr. Rivera said non-committally, but Thomas noticed how his eyes tracked the plates of food being distributed, the slight relaxation in his shoulders as he realized this wasn't a one-time offering or a trick. When Thomas returned to Mother Jones, she was watching him with an appraising look. You did good with that one, she said, nodding toward Mr. Rivera. He's been through a lot. Lost his wife last year, son's in prison, doesn't trust easy. Karen mentioned Davis Tower, Thomas said. She wants to expand the program there next. Mother Jones nodded. Tough place. But good people, most of them. Just forgotten by everyone who could help. Not anymore, Thomas said quietly. As the evening progressed, Thomas found himself deep in conversation with Walter and 2 other seniors about changes they'd seen in the city over decades. Their perspectives on neighborhood transformation, what others called urban renewal but they experienced as displacement, gave him insights no business report ever could. Later, as everyone enjoyed slices of apple pie, Luis stood and cleared his throat. I've got an announcement, he said, waiting until the room quieted. Thanks to the program, I've been accepted to City College. Starting this fall, I'll be studying social work while continuing my job with Neighborhood Table. The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Thomas watched as Karen hugged Luis, her pride evident. When Luis had first been hired as the program's community liaison, he'd mentioned his dream of going back to school someday. Thomas hadn't realized someday would come so soon, but he was thrilled. After the celebration died down, Thomas found himself helping with cleanup, washing dishes alongside Karen in the small kitchen. Did you know about Luis? He asked. Karen nodded, smiling. He got the acceptance letter last week but wanted to tell everyone at once. The scholarship from the company's education fund made it possible. Thomas felt a surge of satisfaction. When they'd created the position for Luis, they'd made sure it included education benefits. It was gratifying to see him taking advantage of the opportunity. The Davis Tower proposal is ready, Karen said, changing the subject. I left it on your desk this afternoon. I'll review it first thing tomorrow, Thomas promised. It's ambitious, she warned. We'll need more resources than our previous expansions. If it's the right thing to do, we'll find a way, Thomas assured her. Karen paused in her dishwashing, turning to face him. You know, when you first told me you'd followed me home that night, I thought you were either crazy or looking for some kind of corporate PR opportunity. Thomas laughed. I probably was a little crazy. Following an employee home definitely crossed some lines. It did, Karen agreed. But I'm glad you did it. She gestured toward the community room where the last of the seniors were saying their goodbyes, Louise helping Mother Jones with her coat. None of this would have happened otherwise. It would have, Thomas corrected her. You were already doing the work. I just helped make it bigger. Karen shook her head. It's more than that. You saw possibility where most people would just see problems. You didn't just write a check, you showed up. You listened. That matters. As they finished the dishes, Thomas reflected on how much had changed in 3 months. What had begun as simple curiosity about an employee's unusual behavior had evolved into something that was changing lives, including his own. In the corporate world he'd inhabited for so long, success was measured in profits and market share. But here in this modest community room with its mismatched chairs and faded curtains, he'd discovered a different kind of success, one measured in relationships formed, dignity restored and genuine needs met. As Thomas said goodnight to Mother Jones, she held onto his hand a moment longer than necessary. You're doing good work, she said simply. Keep it up. Coming from her, it felt like the highest praise he'd ever received. 1 year after Thomas had first followed Karen home, Neighborhood Table had grown beyond what either of them had imagined. The program now served over 200 seniors across 8 locations, including Davis Tower, which had become their most challenging but rewarding site. What had begun as a simple meal service had expanded to include health screenings, social activities, and a grocery delivery option for those who couldn't attend the communal dinners. Today was special, the official opening of their first dedicated center, a converted storefront located between several senior housing buildings. The space had been renovated to include a commercial kitchen, dining area, small library, and offices for the program staff, which had grown to include 5 full-time employees and dozens of regular volunteers. Thomas arrived early, wanting a quiet moment to take in what they had accomplished. The center wasn't fancy. They'd kept costs reasonable, but it was warm and inviting, with comfortable furniture, good lighting, and walls decorated with photographs of the seniors they served. Admiring your handiwork? Karen's voice came from behind him. Thomas turned to see her standing in the doorway, looking professional in a simple blazer, her confidence now matching her position. No one seeing her now would guess she had once been a customer service representative working double shifts to feed her neighbors. Our handiwork, Thomas corrected. This is your vision come to life. Karen smiled as she joined him in surveying the space. I never imagined anything like this when I was packing up cafeteria leftovers a year ago. Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed. For all of us, Thomas agreed. The transformation hadn't been limited to the program. Thomas himself had changed profoundly over the past year. His priorities had shifted, both professionally and personally. He still ran Horizon Technologies with the same skill, but his approach to leadership had evolved, becoming more compassionate and community-minded. The company had followed his lead, embracing a stronger commitment to social responsibility that went beyond mere PR. Is everything ready for the ceremony? He asked. Karen nodded. The mayor's office confirmed he'll be here at 11. The caterers are setting up now. Luis is bringing Mother Jones and the original group from our building around 10:30, so they can have the best seats. Thomas smiled at the mention of Mother Jones. Despite her initial skepticism, she had become one of the program's most vocal advocates, even agreeing to speak at today's opening. How's she doing? He asked. I haven't seen her in a couple of weeks. Better since the new medication. Her doctor says she's the most stubborn patient he's ever had, which she took as a compliment. Karen checked her watch. I should help with the setup. The press will be arriving soon. As Karen headed to the kitchen, Thomas walked to the small office that had been designated as his whenever he visited the center. Though he remained CEO of Horizon, he now spent every Friday working directly with Neighborhood Table, a schedule change that had raised eyebrows in the corporate world but had become non-negotiable. For him, on his desk sat a framed photograph, taken at the Davis Tower launch 6 months earlier. Thomas and Karen surrounded by seniors, all raising glasses in celebration. Next to it was a handwritten note from Mr. Rivera, who had initially been so wary but now helped coordinate the Davis Tower location. "Thank you for seeing us when others looked away," it read simply. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Luis stood there looking sharp in a button-down shirt and tie, his college textbook tucked under his arm. "Got a minute?" he asked. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." Thomas followed Luis to the main room where a small group of people had gathered. Among them was a middle-aged woman in a business suit looking around with keen interest. "This is Diane Powell," Luis said. "She runs the Community Foundation in Westside. She heard about what we're doing and wants to talk about expanding there." Westside was a neighborhood across town, one Thomas knew was struggling with similar issues of senior isolation and food insecurity. As they shook hands, Diane got straight to the point. "We've been trying to address senior hunger for years," she said, "but nothing has stuck the way your program has. I want to understand how you've made it work." "The secret is standing right beside you," Thomas said, nodding toward Luis. "And it's about to walk through that door." Karen had emerged from the kitchen, deep in conversation with one of the volunteers. "It's not about creating a program for people," Thomas explained. "It's about creating it with them. Karen and Luis don't just run Neighborhood Table. They live in the communities we serve. They understand the needs because they see them every day." Diane nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Most initiatives fail because they're designed by people who have never experienced the problems they're trying to solve." "Exactly," Thomas agreed. He was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. Mother Jones had arrived, moving slowly with her cane but making a grand entrance nonetheless. Behind her came Walter, Mr. Rivera, and several other seniors from the original group, all dressed in their best clothes for the occasion. "There's my boy," Mother Jones called out when she spotted Thomas. "Come help an old woman to her seat of honor." Thomas excused himself from Diane and went to offer his arm to Mother Jones. As he guided her to the front row of chairs set up for the ceremony, she kept up a running commentary on everything from the center's decor to the mayor's rumored romantic entanglements. "You clean up nice," she said, patting his hand as he helped her sit. "Bet all those fancy business magazines would love a picture of you escorting an old black woman to her seat." Thomas laughed. "They can get in line. Today's not about me or the company. It's about celebrating what this community has built." Mother Jones studied him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do," she nodded, satisfied. "You've come a long way from that man who followed Karen home thinking he was doing some kind of good deed. Now you understand." "Understand what?" Thomas asked. "That we're not a charity case. We're not here for you to save. We're your neighbors. Your family. Your community." She gestured around the room, which was filling with people. "All this works because you figured that out." Before Thomas could respond, Karen called him over to meet a reporter who wanted a statement before the ceremony. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions, photographs, and preparations. At exactly 11, the mayor arrived with his entourage. The room grew quiet as Karen stepped up to the podium to begin the ceremony. "A year ago," she began, "I was working double shifts and packing leftover cafeteria food to feed my elderly neighbors." She paused, looking around the room. "Today we're opening the first neighborhood table center, with the capacity to serve hundreds of seniors who might otherwise go hungry or eat alone." As Karen continued her speech, thanking supporters and explaining the program's mission, Thomas found himself watching the faces in the crowd. The seniors from the original building sat proudly in the front row. Behind them were residents from Davis Tower and the other locations they now served. Staff members and volunteers lined the walls, while representatives from other community organizations and potential donors filled the remaining seats. What struck Thomas most was the sense of connection in the room. This wasn't just about a successful program or a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It was about a community that had formed around a simple idea, that no one, especially those who had given a lifetime of service to their families and neighborhoods, should be forgotten or go hungry. When Karen finished speaking, she introduced Mother Jones, who made her way to the podium with surprising energy for a woman of her age. "I'm not one for long speeches," Mother Jones began, her voice strong despite her years. "But I've seen a lot of programs come and go in my neighborhood. Most don't last because they're run by people who think they know what we need without ever asking us." She looked directly at Thomas. "This one's different. It started with a young woman who saw her neighbors needed food and companionship. It grew because a man with power and resources decided to listen instead of just taking over. And it works because it's built on respect. Mother Jones turned back to the audience. I've lived in this city for 83 years. Seen it change, not always for the better. But Neighborhood Table reminds me of the way things used to be, when neighbors looked out for each other no matter what. After Mother Jones finished to enthusiastic applause, the mayor gave a predictably political speech before cutting the ribbon across the center's main doorway. As cameras flashed and people cheered, Thomas found himself standing slightly apart, taking in the moment. Karen appeared at his side. "Penny, for your thoughts? Just thinking about that night I decided to follow you home," Thomas admitted. "Best bad decision I ever made," Karen laughed. "Definitely crossed some boundaries." "Definitely," Thomas agreed. "But it led to all of this." He gestured to the bustling room, where seniors were now mingling with visitors, proudly showing off their new center. "You know," Karen said thoughtfully, "I was terrified when you called me into your office that day. I thought I was going to lose my job because I was taking food from the cafeteria. Instead, you ended up with a new one. A better one," Karen corrected. "One that matters." Luis joined them, bringing cups of punch. "Mr. Rivera just told that foundation director that she should fund centers like this in every neighborhood. I think she's convinced." "Good," Thomas said. "That's exactly what should happen." As the celebration continued around them, Thomas reflected on the unexpected journey of the past year. What had begun with simple curiosity about an employee's unusual behavior had grown into something that had transformed not just a community, but his own understanding of what really mattered in life. He had followed Karen that night looking for answers about her. Instead, he had found answers about himself, about the kind of leader and person he wanted to be. Across the room, Mother Jones caught his eye and raised her cup in a silent toast. Thomas raised his in return, acknowledging what they both knew. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with a single step in an unexpected direction, and sometimes they lead you exactly where you need to be.